The notification buzzed on my phone during Lily's parent-teacher conference, pulling me out of the conversation. Mrs. Carter was going on about how bright Lily's future looked, how she had the potential to get into the best pre-med programs. I should have been beaming with pride, soaking in every word, but my attention flickered to my phone screen. $62,000 withdrawal. Auto House Motors. For a moment, I just stared at it, frozen. $62,000? My stomach twisted as I tried to make sense of it. It had to be a mistake. Maybe the bank had been hacked, or there was some kind of glitch. But dread crept in, and my chest tightened. I felt the room close in on me. "Mrs. Collins, is everything okay?" Mrs. Carter's voice pulled me back, and I realized she was waiting for a response. "Sorry," I stammered, locking my phone. "Just a work thing." She nodded, but I barely heard what she said after that. My heart was pounding too loudly. As soon as the meeting ended, I rushed out of the school, barely managing a quick apology to Lily for cutting things short. Once I was in my car, I opened the banking app and checked again, hoping I'd imagined it. But there it was. $62,000 withdrawn. Auto House Motors. My hands started shaking as I scrolled through the account history. This wasn't fraud. This wasn't a mistake. Jack had done this. He'd taken money from the college fund, the fund we'd spent years building for Lily and Ethan. I dialed his number, but it went to voicemail. I tried again, gripping the phone so tightly my fingers hurt. Still no answer. I fired off a text. "What is this $62,000 Auto House Motors charge? Call me now." The ride home felt endless, my mind racing with questions and fury. Why would he do this? How could he? By the time I pulled into the driveway, my heart was pounding in my chest, and I thought I was ready for whatever explanation Jack had. But I wasn't ready for what I saw. A cherry-red convertible sat in the driveway, shiny and obnoxious, its paint glinting in the evening light. It looked completely out of place next to our aging SUV and the modest house we called home. And there he was, Jack, standing beside it with the biggest grin on his face, like a kid showing off a new toy. He waved at me, calling out something I didn't register because I was too busy trying to keep my breath steady. My entire body was trembling. I stepped out of the car and just stood there for a moment, staring at him, at the car, at the pile of destroyed trust sitting in our driveway. Jack strode toward me, all smiles, gesturing toward the convertible like it was some kind of trophy. I couldn't even speak at first. My mouth opened, but no words came out. Finally, I managed to choke out, "What is this?" He brushed it off, said something about how incredible the car was, how long he'd wanted one. His voice was light, casual, as if this wasn't a life-altering betrayal. I could feel my pulse pounding in my temples. I asked him how he'd paid for it, though I already knew the answer. His response was infuriating, a shrug paired with a dismissive tone that implied I was overreacting. He acted like the $62,000 had been burning a hole in his pocket, like it wasn't the college fund we'd painstakingly built over the years. When I brought up the kids, Lily, who had worked so hard for her grades, and Ethan, who dreamed of studying engineering, he barely blinked. He had the audacity to tell me we could save up again, as if we had time, as if he hadn't just torched the future we'd promised them. I stood there in disbelief, staring at the man I thought I knew. How could he be so selfish, so blind to what this meant for our family? The car gleamed in the driveway, a garish monument to his betrayal. And all I could think was, this isn't just a mistake. This is who he is. I sat at the kitchen table that night, staring at the balance on our bank account, the glaring proof of what Jack had done. It felt surreal, like I was watching someone else's life unravel. The kids were upstairs, immersed in their schoolwork, and I envied the oblivion of their innocence. They didn't yet know that the safety net we had worked so hard to weave for them had been slashed apart by the man who was supposed to be their biggest supporter. For most of my adult life, I had been the glue holding this family together. I'd left a promising career in marketing when Lily was born because it made sense at the time. Jack's job was demanding, and someone needed to be present for the kids. I didn't resent the choice. I loved being there for Lily and later for Ethan. But leaving my career had also meant leaving behind a certain amount of independence. Every decision after that, from the groceries I bought to the vacations we skipped, revolved around careful budgeting and long-term goals. Jack had once seemed just as committed to those goals. When we first started saving for the kids' college fund, he was all in. We had a plan: cut back on non-essentials, contribute to the fund monthly, and make sure Lily and Ethan had the opportunities we hadn't. I thought we were in this together. But over the years, Jack had started changing. It was subtle at first. He'd spend more on gadgets we didn't need or push back when I suggested setting stricter limits on our spending. The man who used to dream big for our family now seemed to dream only for himself. When I looked at Jack that evening, standing in the living room with his arms crossed defensively, I could barely reconcile him with the man I'd married. Once, he had been ambitious and full of charm, the kind of person who could light up a room with his presence. But lately, that charm felt like a distant memory, replaced by a selfishness I couldn't ignore. His midlife crisis had taken hold like a storm, and I was watching him destroy everything we'd built together. Meanwhile, our kids had been everything I could have hoped for and more. Lily, with her quiet determination, spent every free moment buried in biology textbooks or volunteering at the local hospital. She dreamed of becoming a doctor, and I never doubted she'd make it. Ethan, my curious inventor, was always tinkering with something, building gadgets out of spare parts and talking excitedly about his future in engineering. They both understood the sacrifices we'd made to save for their futures, and they worked hard to honor that. But now, those dreams were at risk. I couldn't understand how Jack could look at those two bright, hard-working kids and think his fleeting desire for a car mattered more than their futures. That night, when I finally confronted him, he shrugged off my questions like they were an inconvenience. He didn't even try to justify his actions beyond shallow excuses that only deepened my anger. As I lay in bed later, staring at the ceiling, I realized this wasn't just about the money. It was about trust. It was about the person Jack had become and whether I could ever count on him again. I stood in the living room that night, every nerve in my body on edge as Jack tried to explain away what he had done. His words were like gasoline on a fire, each one fanning the flames of my disbelief and fury. He didn't apologize. He didn't even seem to grasp the gravity of his actions. Instead, he brushed off my outrage like it was irrational, like I was the one overreacting to his thoughtless indulgence. What stung the most wasn't just the act itself, but the way he framed it. He didn't see the money as ours, or as something that belonged to the family we'd built together. He saw it as his. He talked about how hard he'd worked for it, as though the hours I'd spent budgeting, managing the household, and sacrificing my career weren't equally part of that equation. When I brought up the kids and the years we'd spent building their college fund, he waved it away, saying we could always start saving again. His words felt like a slap. Start saving again? Lily was starting college in less than a year. Ethan wasn't far behind her. Did he even understand how much tuition costs had ballooned since we were their age? Did he even care? I pushed him, demanding to know why he thought a sports car, was worth gambling with our children's future. He turned defensive, spouting off about how he'd spent his entire life providing for this family and how he deserved to have something for himself. It was as if he thought the sacrifices we'd made as a couple had been solely his burden, as if I hadn't spent 2 decades of my life supporting his career and keeping this family afloat. As he spoke, a series of moments flashed through my mind, painting a picture I had been unwilling to see until now. I thought back to last month when Lily had received an award for academic excellence. She had worked so hard for it, and we were both supposed to attend the ceremony. Jack had claimed he had a work meeting he couldn't get out of. At the time, I'd believed him, even reassured Lily when she seemed disappointed. But now, with the car gleaming outside in the driveway, I couldn't help but wonder if he'd been at the dealership instead. And then there was the time Ethan had excitedly shown Jack a prototype for a solar-powered gadget he'd built from scratch. Jack had nodded distractedly, barely looking up from his phone. I had chalked it up to stress from work, but now I wasn't so sure. How long had his attention been shifting away from us, and how had I missed it? As we argued, I noticed movement out of the corner of my eye. Lily was standing at the edge of the staircase, her face pale, her brow furrowed. She must have heard at least part of our conversation. I tried to shield her from the worst of it, telling her everything was fine, but Jack cut me off. He turned to her with a tone so casual it made my skin crawl and told her not to worry, that he had just bought a new car. Her eyes widened, her gaze darting between us. She looked at me for an explanation, and I had nothing to give her. I could see the disbelief and hurt forming on her face, and it shattered me. All I wanted to do was protect her from this, but there was no way to soften the blow. Jack's carelessness had exposed itself fully, and there was no taking it back. That night, I sat alone in our bedroom, staring at the photo of Lily and Ethan we kept on the nightstand. They had worked so hard, carried themselves with so much grace despite the sacrifices we had all made to give them a shot at their dreams. And Jack had tossed it all away for a car. His disregard wasn't just a betrayal of me, it was a betrayal of them. I felt a shift deep inside me, the beginning of something resolute and unyielding. This wasn't something I could forgive, and I wasn't sure I even wanted to try. The days following the discovery of Jack's betrayal were a blur of raw emotions. Anger surged through me in waves, each one hotter and more consuming than the last. How could he be so selfish? How could he look at our children, who had worked so hard and asked for so little, and decide that his fleeting desire was more important than their future? But alongside the anger came something darker. Guilt. Guilt for not seeing it sooner, for letting him take control of our finances, without question, for trusting him to have our family's best interests at heart. At night, the heartbreak would hit me. I would lie awake, staring at the ceiling, feeling the weight of it pressing down on me. This wasn't just about the money. It was about what the money represented. Security, trust, a promise to our children that we were building something solid for them. Jack had shattered all of that, and I didn't know how to put the pieces back together. Jack, meanwhile, seemed oblivious to the chaos he had caused. If anything, his behavior grew more erratic, as though spending the money had freed him from the responsibilities he had once pretended to care about. He started taking the car out almost every evening, sometimes for hours, leaving me to handle everything at home. He would return late, the engine roaring into the driveway, smelling faintly of beer and cheap cologne. His social media posts made it even worse. He started posting selfies with the car, captions filled with nauseating platitudes about living life to the fullest and treating yourself because you deserve it. His friends from work showered him with comments, congratulating him on his midlife upgrade and joking about how they wished they had his guts. Every post felt like a knife twisting in my gut. He was celebrating the destruction of our family's stability as if it were some kind of personal triumph. Meanwhile, the consequences of his actions began to show. The bills started piling up. I had to juggle payments, deciding which ones could wait and which ones couldn't. Every month, I watched the savings we had left dwindle, knowing there was no way we could rebuild the college fund in time for Lily's freshman year. I tried to shield the kids from the worst of it, but they weren't stupid. They could see the tension in the house, the way I jumped every time the phone rang, the way Jack avoided family meals altogether. The dam finally broke one afternoon when Lily overheard me venting to a friend over the phone. I'd thought she was upstairs, working on her essays, but when I hung up and turned around, she was standing in the doorway. Her face was pale, her hands clenched into fists at her sides. She asked me if it was true, if her father had taken the college fund and spent it on the car. I froze, trying to find a way to soften the truth, but there wasn't one. Her reaction was immediate and fiery. She stormed into the living room, where Jack was lounging on the couch, scrolling through his phone. She demanded to know how he could do this to her and Ethan, how he could destroy everything we'd worked for, and then act like it didn't matter. Her voice shook with anger and betrayal, and I could see the tears brimming in her eyes. Jack's response was as dismissive as ever. He brushed her off, telling her she would figure it out, that plenty of kids took out loans for college and turned out fine. The indifference in his voice was almost more than I could take. Ethan's reaction was quieter, but no less devastating. Later that evening, as I was tucking him in, he looked up at me with wide, worried eyes and asked if we were going to lose the house. The question hit me like a punch to the stomach. I could see the fear in his face, the weight of responsibility he was trying to shoulder, even though he was just a kid. I assured him we wouldn't lose the house, but the fact that he even had to ask broke something inside me. The tension in the house was unbearable after that. Lily barely spoke to Jack, and when she did, it was with clipped words and icy glares. Ethan avoided him entirely, retreating to his room to bury himself in his projects. I tried to hold everything together, but the cracks were becoming too large to ignore. One evening, after Jack had left for yet another joyride in his precious car, I sat at the kitchen table, staring at the stack of bills in front of me. I felt trapped, not just by the financial mess, but by the years of putting Jack's needs first, of prioritizing his comfort over my own. I had given up so much for this family, for him, and now I was the one left to pick up the pieces. But as I sat there, a new feeling began to take root. It was small at first, barely noticeable beneath the layers of anger and heartbreak, but it grew steadily. It was determination. I didn't know how yet, but I knew I had to protect Lily and Ethan, even if that meant making decisions I had spent years avoiding. Jack had chosen himself over us, and now it was time for me to choose my kids over him. I hit my breaking point on a quiet Sunday morning, sitting at the kitchen table with a steaming cup of coffee gone cold in my hands. Jack was out again, the rumble of his car fading hours ago, leaving behind the silence of a house brimming with unresolved tension. The kids were upstairs, Lily working on her college applications and Ethan tinkering with one of his projects. But the weight of our circumstances pressed down on me like a stone. I couldn't keep living like this, waiting for Jack to change or take responsibility. His betrayal had already cost us too much, and every passing day made it clearer that he wouldn't stop. If anything, his selfishness was growing, spreading into every corner of our lives. That was the moment I decided to act. I started small, gathering evidence of Jack's financial recklessness. Logging into our accounts, I dug through years of statements, piecing together a pattern I hadn't wanted to see before. Jack hadn't just drained the college fund. He had been taking out personal loans for years to sustain his lifestyle. Vacations I thought we couldn't afford, upgrades to his gadgets, even the flashy suits he insisted were for networking. They were all financed with debt. The deeper I went, the more the lies unraveled, each one leaving me more furious and determined than the last. Armed with this knowledge, I made an appointment with a lawyer. Sitting in that office, I explained everything. The car, the loans, the lies. For the first time, I felt like I had options. The lawyer assured me I had grounds for divorce and could seek financial restitution. It wouldn't be easy, but it was possible. Knowing there was a way out gave me a glimmer of hope I hadn't felt in months. At the same time, I found unexpected strength in my kids. Lily began tutoring younger students, determined to save what she could for college. Watching her work so tirelessly reminded me of her resilience and drive. Ethan started selling his handmade gadgets online, his excitement infectious as he explained how his creations were helping fund his dreams. Their efforts inspired me. I couldn't let Jack's selfishness define our story. My children deserved better, and I was going to fight for them, and for the future they had worked so hard to build. The evening I confronted Jack for the last time, the house felt colder than usual, as if it already knew what was coming. I sat at the dining table, a folder of printed bank statements and loan records in front of me. The papers represented hours of digging through his lies. But they were more than that. They were my resolve made tangible. Jack walked in late, the sound of the car engine cutting off in the driveway before he sauntered through the door. He didn't look at me as he hung up his jacket, his keys jingling in his hand. I waited until he turned toward the kitchen, his smug nonchalance grating against the storm building in my chest. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. The evidence spoke for itself. I told him what I'd found. Every lie, every loan, every reckless purchase disguised as a necessity. I laid it out plainly, stripping away his excuses before he even had a chance to make them. He stared at me, his expression shifting from surprise to irritation, as if my uncovering the truth was more inconvenient than damning. When I told him he had a choice, sell the car, return the money to our account, and begin repairing the damage he'd done, his reaction was exactly what I'd feared but expected. He scoffed, dismissing me with a condescending laugh, calling me melodramatic, ungrateful, and worse. He accused me of not understanding the pressure he was under, as if that justified throwing away everything we'd built for our children. But I wasn't looking for his approval or understanding anymore. I wasn't trying to reason with him or convince him to care. This time, I stayed calm, my voice steady as I told him the truth he refused to face. This wasn't about him. It was about Lily and Ethan, their future, and the promises we had made to them. And I wasn't going to let his selfishness destroy it any further. Jack didn't take me seriously. He leaned back in his chair, arms crossed, telling me there was no way I'd follow through with my threat. He thought I was bluffing, that I wouldn't have the strength to stand up to him. But he was wrong. The next morning, I filed for divorce. It wasn't an impulsive decision. It was the culmination of months of reflection and heartbreak. Jack had left me no choice. I included every piece of evidence I'd gathered, ensuring the court would see the depth of his financial recklessness and how it had jeopardized our family. When I told him what I'd done, he exploded. He ranted about how I was ruining his life, as if the years of deceit and betrayal hadn't been his doing. His anger didn't shake me, it fueled me. For the first time in years, I felt like I was taking control, like I was standing up for myself and my children in a way I should have done long ago. I thought I might feel grief or regret, but all I felt was clarity. Jack had made his choice, and now I was making mine. I wasn't just walking away from his lies. I was stepping toward a future where Lily, Ethan, and I could rebuild without his selfishness weighing us down. It was time to put us first, and I wasn't looking back. The divorce proceedings were as messy as I expected, but the truth couldn't be ignored. Jack's financial misdeeds came to light in court, and the picture they painted was damning. The judge ordered the sale of the sports car, its bright red vanity now just a hollow reminder of his selfishness. The proceeds went straight into the kids' college fund, and Jack was forced to contribute further as part of the settlement. His reputation, once polished, was tarnished by the evidence of his recklessness and deceit. For me, the end of our marriage was the beginning of something new. I started taking on freelance work, rediscovering parts of myself I had put on hold for years. Lily and Ethan became my anchors, their resilience and optimism lighting the path forward. With the support of friends and the determination to rebuild, I found a strength I never knew I had. Together, we began again. The highway stretched out before us, golden sunlight spilling over the trees, as I drove Lily to her college orientation. She sat beside me, her backpack at her feet, humming softly to the music playing on the radio. I stole glances at her, marveling at her quiet determination. Despite everything, she had made it. We had made it. The last year had tested us in ways I never imagined, but it had also shown me how strong we could be. Lily's tutoring sessions and Ethan's gadget sales had brought them closer together, each supporting the other as we rebuilt our lives. Their resilience reminded me that even in the face of betrayal, love and unity could prevail. I thought back to the woman I had been for so many years, someone who sacrificed her dreams and identity to keep the peace, to meet Jack's endless demands for approval. Letting go of him had felt like stepping into an abyss, but it had also been the first step toward reclaiming myself. I was no longer living in the shadow of his selfishness. I had learned to stand tall, for my children And for me. As we pulled into the campus parking lot, a familiar car caught my eye. Jack was at the wheel of a battered sedan, its rusted frame a stark contrast to the glossy sports car he'd once flaunted. He glanced my way but quickly looked away, as though he couldn't bear to meet my gaze. I didn't feel anger or pity, only relief. Turning to Lily, I smiled as she grabbed her bag, ready to face her future. As she disappeared into the crowd of students, I whispered to myself, "We're free now." And for the first time in years, I truly believed it.